All right, everybody. Thank you on such a beautiful day for coming to the talk, and thank you to the people on Zoom who are listening to us from afar. I'm Ann Lin. I think everybody knows that, the director of the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies, and I'm really delighted to be able to welcome our noon lecture speaker today. This is the 11th presentation of the noon lecture series. For winter 2024. The complete series schedule, if you don't have it, is out on the table near the elevator where you came in. And of course, if you are not getting our email reminders weekly, please see Ina and make sure you get on that email list. I have two announcements to start off. First, please note that next week's presentation, April 16th, which was going to be Siqi Zhen from MIT, Siqi had to postpone her talk until fall 2024 due to an unforeseen schedule conflict. But we are really lucky. We will be presenting Professor Xiang from Western Michigan University, who's going to come and talk about her new project, Untamed Shrews, Negotiating New Womanhood in Modern China. So we hope you will come for that. Next, just this week, tomorrow and Thursday, 6 o'clock, the CHOP film series will restart. We'll be presenting 2 nights of film showcasing documentaries about China through the lens of European and Chinese directors, with stories spanning the 1950s, 1970s, and 1990s, these 20-year intervals. Our discussants are 2 of our wonderful postdoctoral fellows, Gavin Healy and Yukun Zeng. Refreshments and Q&A will follow the films, and I know most of our CHOP events are here, but these are actually going to be in the library, in the first floor gallery space at Hatcher North Library. If you go in the main doors, you'll see signs, and it's right off to the side. So this is free and open to the public, of course. Please come, and please invite people to come with you. Now it's my really great pleasure to present Yan Liu, Associate Professor in History at SUNY Buffalo. He specializes in the history of medicine in pre-modern China, with a focus on material practices of medicine, religious healing, the history of the senses, and the global circulation of knowledge. His first book, Healing with Poisons, Potent Medicines in Medieval China, was published by the University of Washington Press in 2021 and is available through open access. His book won the 2023 William H. Welch Medal from the American Association for the History of Medicine. His second project, which he'll talk about today, explores a transcultural history of aromatics and the production of olfactory knowledge in Tang and Song China. And I have to mention the most important thing in his biography, which is, of course, that he is an alum of the LRCCS, of the Center for Chinese Studies, 2007-2008. So welcome back. It's so great to have you back. So today, of course, the talk is entitled Sent from Afar, Aromatics, Healing, and the Making of Olfactory Knowledge in Tang and Song China. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you very much, and for your kind introduction. It's so great to be back after a while, and as Anne just mentioned, I am a proud alumnus of LRCCS. Did my master study from 2007-2009. It was really a while ago, and that was really wonderful time, a critical time for me as I was contemplating the possibility of switching from science to humanities. I appreciate it's a very nourishing environment at the center, and I had a great cohort, a wonderful group of teachers. I want to mention Kristen DePay here, who was my mentor and introduced the discipline of history to me, and taught me how to critically and creatively reading texts, Chinese texts, and also Miranda Brown, who is not here, who opened the door of history medicine to me, which I knew nothing about before taking her graduate seminar, and had been unwaveringly supporting me in the past 15 years, and many other teachers I don't have to mention, so David here, and Eli here, and James Lee, and Bill Baxter. They all, one way or the other, helped me to learn history, Chinese history, history medicine, and without their support, encouragement, it's hard to imagine I can reach this point today. So thank you very much. So today I'm going to talk about my second book project, as I mentioned. This is a study of transcultural history of aromatics from the 7th to 13th century, and also the history of smell in that context. Let me get started. The flourishing of what is commonly called the Silk Road, which refers to this network of connections, routes across Afro-Eurasia in the pre-modern era, facilitated the flow of variety of things, objects, flowing in multiple directions, either through the overland routes or the maritime passages. Among this variety of things, I'm particularly interested in a specific set of things, what I refer to as aromatics. This is an English translation of a Chinese character called xiang. In the modern context, aromatics tend to invite association of perfumes, but in the pre-modern Chinese context, this character xiang could mean a variety of different things. Actually, in the period I studied, perfume was not that prominent a meaning. It could mean incenses, spices, medicines, obviously, in my study. So it basically refers to, generally speaking, anything that emit fragrant smell or the fragrant smell itself. So various Asian places, tropical and subtropical Asian places, are the natural habitats for a variety of plants which produce these aromatic products. Give you some examples here. Frankincense, xiang, which refers to the resinous product of a tree growing in West Asia and East North Africa. And it became a very important aromatic product imported into China during the period study. Saffron, which refers to the flower plant growing in Kashmir and Central Asia, is another example. And sandalwood, tanxiang, coming from Indian and Malay Peninsula, refer to the wood product of a plant growing there. Agarwood, chenxiang, literally means sinking aromatic. It's another wood product from infected by fungi coming from Southeast Asia. And camphor, dragon brain aromatic, lungnao xiang, which refer to the christine of a resinous product from a tree in Sumatra and Borneo in present-day Indonesia. So the historical significance of these substances is immense, as is well known that spice trade shaped world history. But in comparison to the extensive study of these often called spices, their westward movement of them from Asia to West Europe in medieval and early modern period, the study of the eastward movement of the same set of materials from various Asian places to East Asia has received far less attention, especially in the English scholarship. And that's basically what I'm focusing on for my second project, to explore this eastward movement of these materials into Middle period China and their impact on medical, religious, and food culture at the time. But there are some important scholarship produced by Japanese and Chinese scholars here. I want to, written in Japanese Chinese language, that I want to bring your attention to. Yamada Kentaro probably is the scholar who had produced the most extensive study of aromatics in East Asia to this day. From 1950s onward, he has published a number of books exploring the identification, transmission, routes of transmission, as well as local uses of aromatics based on linguistic and geographical analysis. Lin Tianwei's work, a book published in the 1960s, on the other hand, has a sharper focus on the commodity, on the aromatics as a trade commodity, especially during the Song period time, highlighting their important role in Song commerce. In the Western scholarship, in English scholarship, there are no devoted monographs to this topic, but there are some important early works which touch upon this topic, such as the classical study by Bertolt Laufert. This was done actually more than 100 years ago, studying a variety of, medicines, aromatics, plants, minerals, textiles circulating across Eurasia, primarily based on a philological and linguistic analysis. And half a century later, historian of China, Adam Schaefer, built upon his early work, Laufer's earlier work, but had a sharper focus on the study of, in his term, exotics, right? Tang exotics, these exotic commodities imported into Tang, China, and how these things stoked fantasy of Tang people. And he particularly highlight here, I use a quote from that book, that once they were imported into Tang, China, they, quote, have become partly enigmatic entities whose only true life is literary and metaphorical. In short, they belong to the mental world even more than to the physical world, end quote. Although there's no doubt that fantasies and enchantment play a very important role in elevating the appeal of these aromatics, I try to highlight, bring the issue of materiality back to the discussion because the actors, particularly medical writers at the time, actually wrote quite a lot about the material nature of these things, paying attention to what they look like, what they taste like, and what, above all, what they smell like. That's what I'm particularly interested in. So I'm interested in the intimate relationship between the materiality of these substances and the process of knowledge production, knowledge making in medical, in religious, in food culture during this period of time. And particularly the olfactory knowledge, because actors during that period of time, they were fully aware of the characteristic strong potent smell of these imported aromatics and investigated them with intense interest. And I'm interested in how the imported aromatics fosters the new understanding of these aromatics, the smell of them in the process of producing medical knowledge on that. So, and also I want to have a conversation with scholars on sensory studies in Asia and beyond to explore this issue further. Before delving into the detail of my talk, I want to give a broad view of the history of aromatics in pre-modern China. A big picture here. In ancient time, Qin Han period time, there are only sporadic mention of overseas imported aromatics, particularly in literary sources. This is primarily based on Olivier Milburn's early work, very important work. In the following centuries, with the introduction of Buddhism from India, they brought with them a host of aromatic substances, particularly in the culture, prominent in the culture of burning incense. And then in the following Tang period time, in early 7th century, we actually, in the Chinese sources, find the first categorization of aromatics as a distinct category in anthology of literary works. And also in the Tang period time, with the enlarged importation of these aromatics, we find they're spread into the medical and religious cultures in particular, but by and large restricted to the royal and aristocratic circles, limited usage, probably because of the high prices. In the Song period of time, the situation changed with the rise of maritime trade, as well as the support from the Song government. We see the wider consumption of these aromatics in medicine, in food, in the culture of burning incense in particular. In the following centuries, during the Mongol Empire, because of this big, Eurasian building of the Eurasian Empire across Eurasia, facilitated the flow of aromatics over long distances. And we find particularly the impact of Islamic culture on the writing about medicine and food in China at this time. And this continued until the 15th century, in early Ming period time, when government started to withdraw from the overseas trade, and when the trade of aromatics started to fall into the private hands until the arrival of Europeans in 16th century. So my talk, my project basically focused on this important 2 periods of time in the history of aromatics, Tang and Song period time, to just think about how the importation of this variety of substances and the new ways of construing sensations transformed Chinese society, particularly during the Song period. I also want to introduce the sources. Today's talk will focus on the medical sources. I'll start from there. But there are different kinds of medical sources under study here. Starting with the theoretical treatises, often called medical classics, 易经. These are theoretical writings, the tradition of which can be traced back to the Han period time, using the framework of 5 phases yin, yang, and qi to explain the causation, the progression, and the treatment of various illnesses. Not much on drug therapy in this genre, but some interesting discussion on smell that I will come back in a minute. Material medical writing, 本草, is another genre. This is pharmacological writing with a long list of drugs, each with its name, appearance, drug properties, sources supply, time of harvest, and above all, medical uses. Medical formulas, formula books, 方书. This is basically organized by the type of illnesses. Each category usually starts with the discussion of the particular condition in a theoretical framework, followed by a long list of remedies, prescriptions to treat that particular condition. I want to underscore here that different kind of medical sources have different kind of epistemic orientations. Using Material Medica and the formula books as example, Material Medica texts follow a tradition of commentary tradition. Basically, later works faithfully copy the core text produced in the time period time and added a layer of more commentaries over time at the end of each drug entry. So the treatises get larger and larger over time, and there is a sense of respecting the textual authority produced during the time period time in this kind of writing. By contrast, formula books are more of an eclectic assembly of miscellaneous remedies called from a variety of sources, sometimes based on personal experiences, revealing this more empirical orientation writing formula books. Right? So all these different genres of text, medical texts, prior to the Song period time are lost to us in entirety. We have fragmented manuscripts here and there. And unfortunately, many of them are preserved in the Song editions due to the rise of printing at the time, Song and the later editions, allowing for modern scholars' recovery of these texts, though with the caveat of they're always subject to Song editors' editorial modifications. Right? So we do have manuscripts, on the other hand, produced from the Tang and even before the Tang from the Dunhuang and the Turfen. These are texts, manuscripts produced during the earlier period without later editors' modifications, and they also revealed important local features of medical practice. But they're also with the caveat they're often fragmented and incomplete without the information, the contextual information, authorship, or time of production, etc., etc. So I use both type of sources for my study. Okay, so now let's get to the meat of my story here. Starting with the theoretical texts, 黄帝内经, Yellow Empire's Inner Classic Basic Questions. This is a foundational medical text emerged during the Han period time. As mentioned before, it used the framework of yin yang and 5 phase to explain the causation and progression of illnesses. Here, the 5 phase system correlates 5 different organs with 5 different seasons, colors, directions, sounds, but also interestingly, smells, 5 different kind of smell: rancid, burnt, fragrant, bloody, and putrid. And here, identify this kind of correlation is more of a cosmological conception of smell. Smell here doesn't really mean those particular organs have the particular smell. It's more of an abstract concept fit into the 5 phase system to explain disease formation, right? So, but that situation actually changed in the following centuries, manifested by this 8th century text written by a scholar named Wang Bing, who offered an important commentary to the Han classic. This is called 崇广补助皇帝内经素问. He added 5 new chapters to the end of the 黄帝内经. One chapter is particular of my interest because this chapter explains the growth and transformation of all beings in the world, and where Wang Bing offers a novel interpretation of 5 qi. This 5 qi actually doesn't refer to the qi in the environment or flow in the body, but actually refer to things, to beings. 5 olfactory property for beings. Being here refer to minerals, plants, animals, and human beings. Right? So, and this 5 qi actually is 5 different kind of olfactory property, same as is elaborated in the Huangdi Neijing, but with very different kind of connotation with a manifest material conception of smell associated with beings in the world. This indicates a rising awareness, rising consciousness of olfactory experience at the time, whether it's connected to the importation of aromatics from faraway places. It's hard to say, but it's interesting to see this new phenomenon. In the material medical writings, I started with this important 7th century text, newly revised Materia Medica. This is the first Materia Medica writing sponsored by the government in Chinese history. It was compiled by a team of scholar officials, medical specialists, and high-status statesmen. It includes 850 drugs, among which 11 are aromatics from faraway places. This is a 9th century Dunhuang manuscript, which preserves a part of the preface of the text. And in the preface, it's pretty clear that the government produced this text as a way to calibrate or standardize all things in the world, including medicines, to achieve effective ruling. So there's a very strong political agenda behind the production of the text. So these are the 11 overseas aromatics included in this text. So I don't have to go through every single one of them, but the text recognized that they put a majority of these aromatics in the category of trees, except the first one in herb category, and the last one in the reptile and fish. Onicha refers to the mollusk, kind of product from a mollusk. And then the text also identify the sources of supply. Many of them came from Southeast Asia, but also from India and from West Asia as well. I want to give you a couple of examples of the recognition of the smell of these aromatics in this Materia Medica, such as suhe. This is our pagan concoction. This is basically a concoction made from a resin of a tree in West Asia. And its fragrance, it's extremely fragrant, as mentioned by the text. Another example is dragon brain aromatic, 龙脑香. This is camphor from Southeast Asia, from Sumatra. Its fragrance could replace that of the dragon brain. So it's interesting here, this dragon brain here refers to indigenous product, as shown by a 5th century text, earlier text, that is connected to dragon bone, which refers to the fossilized animal bones. But that product doesn't have really a strong smell. So this new product from overseas, actually, its fragrance was recognized and considered to be a better substitute for that local one. Other than medicine, we find the text also discuss the mixing of variety of aromatic substances to make incense. This is beyond healing. This 5 different kind of overseas aromatics, together with another domestic one, considered to be the best material for making incense. And clearly, the smell also play a very important role in that realm. So, what are these aromatics? How does the text think about their medical values? Right. So, there's a variety of illnesses considered to be, can be effectively treated by aromatics, but I want to highlight this particular aspect that they are often employed to counter various forms of poison, such as the term malignant qi, 恶气, either circulating in the environment or inside the body. So ingestion or wearing such aromatic substances could eliminate malignant qi. Or the term demonic infestation, 鬼柱. This is an imagination of illnesses in concrete, specific forms like demons that can attack the body and cause devastating effects. Or the term poisonous pestilence, that clearly connects to the epidemics. So the the aromatics are thought to be very effective to treat this variety of form of poison. Although it's not always explicit, we may conjecture that the smell might play a role here. I want to give you a further evidence here from formula collections. This is a text called Wai Tai Miao, Arcane Essentials from the Imperial Library, compiled by a scholar official named Wang Tao in the 8th century. He spent 2 decades in the Imperial Library collecting medical literature and produced this massive collection of formulas, including more than 6,000 formulas. And by my counting, about 5% of them uses aromatics substances from overseas. That's about 300 formulas. Just give you one example of this formula, called formula of the adjunctive code peel. And the Chinese term 吃力加丸 is possibly a Chinese transliteration of a Sanskrit term for adjunctive code, which is a local plant in South China. So for those of you who know Sanskrit, I'd like to talk with you more about that identification. And this formula actually includes 9 different kinds of aromatic substances. And given the foreign name of the formula and abundant use of these overseas aromatics, this formula could be of a foreign origin, likely possibly from India. And consistent with what I find in the mathematical writings, such a formula could eliminate intractable entities and demonic qi, and it can be either ingested or worn near the heart of the human being to achieve the desired effect. It's also interesting that the Wang recognized the source of his formula. Actually, he got it from another shorter formula collection called the Formula for Widespread Aid. This is actually produced by the court of the Tang to disseminate such formulas to the populace. So the inclusion of such a formula by Wang Tao seems to be not just the case to demonstrate his scholarly erudition, but also aimed for this widespread usage in society. Now, I want to use one example from the Dunhuang medical manuscript to demonstrate the different kind of use of aromatic substances in our local region. So as I mentioned before, oftentimes it's really hard to date these manuscripts because of the incomplete nature of them. This is one example. A manuscript includes a dozen of formulas, particularly in this tradition called abstinence from grains, 避谷, as a way to enhance the body and cure illnesses. And one formula from that collection is a formula called a formula that can eliminate gu poison. And gu poison is a kind of a poison prevalent at the time that was considered to be engendered by poisonous vermin. Right? So to get rid of the gu poison, together with this poisoned vermin, the formula employs yellow dragon brain camphor, which I identify as a local variant, a name for camphor product, along with 2 mundane substances, fermented beans and oven earth. And the combination of them produce a peel, and it's interesting that one need to cast a spell onto that peel to make it effective. And there are 3 different kinds of spells here. One is written in the vernacular language, basically means that your father is a dung beetle, and your mother is the demon of Yeshu, a particular type of demon. And you have myriad relatives, and I recognize all of them. And this is a way to target specific pathological agents to get rid of them by using a spell. And not just this one, I also find these 2 additional spells written, basically the Chinese transliteration of the Sanskrit words called Dharanis. And this is very prominent in a school of Buddhism called esoteric Buddhism, very prominent in the Tang period time, which used elaborate rituals, including spells, to achieve magical effects, including healing. Right? So this Buddhist connection is interesting because I do find other manuscripts from the Dunhuang collection, like this one. This is a 10th century manuscript, includes a miscellany of spells, one of which is from a 7th century text that use aromatic medicines to treat gu poison. So you can see the gu poison is at the top of the text, and two aromatics are camphor and guggle, anxi xiang and longnao xiang. They're actually written in the Chinese transliteration of Sanskrit words, but with identification here in Chinese. And it's similarly, it also involves the use of spell here, casting a spell onto the peel in front of the Avalokite Tesvara, which is a very important deity, and cast a spell for 108 times to make it effective. So certainly you can see some connections between the left and between the right, although it's really hard to say this kind of origin, and that's not my primary interest. But suffice to say, the formula this on the left side actually integrates both the mundane materials, probably locally easily available, and far away a material like camphor, as well as the juxtaposition of spell in vernacular language and the foreign spells in Sanskrit, right? So to adapt this far away material and knowledge associated with them into their local tradition to treat characteristic local conditions like gu poison, right? So that's my point here. Okay, so leaving behind the Tang period, let's move to the Song period time. As I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, there was a significant rise of the maritime trade in the Song period time, actually from the 9th century on, due to the rise of the Arabic and the Persian traders sailing across Indian Ocean and actively engaged in trading aromatics, and also because the Song government seized the opportunity to increase the income of the state by taxation and sometimes monopoly on certain aromatics, such as frankincense. The Song court also opened the Overseas Trade Bureau in the serious port cities in south, eastern and southern regions. And these bureaus served the purpose of regulating trade with the foreigners, with the government regulation there. And so, for example, Quanzhou is a very important port city with a bureau there. And in the words of Valerie Hansen, the most globalized place on earth at the time. We do have some kind of interesting material archaeological finds from Quanzhou. This is one example of the aromatics discovered from a shipwreck, actually. This is in the second half of the 13th century. A Chinese ship sailing back from the Indian Ocean sank in the water near Quanzhou for unknown reason, and archaeologists were able to recover a large amount of aromatic materials, including more than 5,000 pounds of alga wood and sandalwood, and also some frankincense, right? So indicating this is flourishing of the trade of aromatics at the time. We do have other shipwreck records, Arabian ships sailing on the other direction from China to various places in Southeast Asia and West Asia, but we don't have much evidence of aromatics on those shipwrecks, understandably, because that's not primarily the stuff people in the Arabic world really need. Actually, they need porcelains. There's a lot of porcelains discovered from those ships. Okay, so at the same time, the Song court actually played a very active role in taking advantage of the rising printing technology to standardize and disseminate important medical texts as a way to promote medical governance. This is the word by history and medicine teaching Henrichs. So the Song court established a particular bureau called the Bureau for Editing Medical Treatises in the middle of the 11th century that published 11 medical texts, including theoretical texts, material medical texts, and formula books. And one of them is interesting to me. It's called Illustrated Material Medica, 本草图经. This is actually the very first material medica that is extant to us with the illustrations of drugs. It contains more than 900 illustrations of drugs. And we may be curious, where did you get the idea of the pictures of drugs, right? So for the domestic drugs, the preface of text says they dispatch personnel to those local regions and collect information about the appearance of those plants and minerals. For overseas drugs, they primarily based on the word of mouth or previous texts that talk about these drugs, right? So different channels. One example here I want to share with you is dragon-brain aromatic camphor, which is one of the most frequently prescribed medicines in Song period time. So this text, illustrated Mathematica, the text itself is lost to us, but it's preserved in the 12th century Mathematica text due to the commentary tradition I explained earlier. So that's the section of the text illustrated Mathematica. And we'd like to invite you to the image of this item here. So on the left side, there seems to be a trunk of a tree where you have 3 blade-like pieces inserted into the trunk. So that likely refer to the process of collecting resin from within a tree. And on the right side, you have a branch. At the top, you have some round-shaped, clustered fruits growing on the branch. So the text actually, the image actually matches what is described in the text, which is shown on the left side. And it also uses some local references. For example, it says that the tree of the camphor actually resembles of cedar. That's a local plant. So presumably the text is talking about the trunk part of it. And in addition, the fruits actually resemble another local plant called galango from southwestern region. So that's that part. And finally, the most important part is the resin. That's the product, right? So resembles a local pine tree. You can see here what is scattered on the ground likely refer to the resinous product of either camphor here or the pine tree. So you can see that it's interesting hybridization of the knowledge, combining the information about the collecting of resins from a faraway tree in Southeast Asia, but also using a series of local references, local trees, try to understand the appearance of this camphor tree. The camphor tree itself, actually, from Southeast Asia, it looks quite different from what is depicted here. It's a very tall tree, could be 100 feet tall, with branches only growing at the top of the tree, right? So that's very different. But this hybridity here, I find is quite interesting. Formula books during the Song period time, also, there's a lot of production of formula books. And one particular produced by the Song court is called Formulary of the Pharmacy Service for Great Peace and for the benefit of the people, produced at the beginning of 12th century. This is actually the very first preset formula collection in Chinese history, which includes more than about 800 preset formulas put into 14 different categories of illnesses. And Pharmacy Service, Hejiju, actually is a new institution established by the Song court in the 11th century. And the goal is to distribute preset formulas to the populace. And this book basically serves as a guide for that institution. There's abundant use of aromatics in this book. By my counting, about 20% of all the formulas here used foreign aromatics. And here is an example of a few salient examples: camphor, frankincense, and arga wood. Each of them is prescribed about 5% of all formulas. This is a marked increase from the Tang formula books, such as the one I introduced early on, the 1,000 Arcane Essentials from Imperial Library, where less than 1%, or sometimes much less than that, of each of these aromatics are used in the formulas. So the change is quite significant between the two periods. And finally, I want to come back to the issue of smell to make the circle complete in Song medicine by using an example of interesting Mathematica text produced by an individual who is a scholar official living in the early 12th century and producing this text. He basically is official serving at the court, working on the discrimination of medicinal substances for the court, and he may have the first-hand experience working with this variety of aromatics. And he offers some novel interpretations of particular drug property, a redefinition of drug property in the preface. Because for all the previous material medical texts prior to his time, the 4 qi basically refer to the 4 different kind of like degree of hotness. That's a very fundamental category of drug property, which can be traced back to the Han period time. And all the following material medical writing follow this. But he considered that's incorrect, and he instead trying to say that actually 4 qi refers to the 4 olfactory properties of drugs, indicating this rising awareness, increased attention to the smell-guided therapy. He also actually highlighted the particular drug, dragon brain, camphor, in his text, claiming that its pure fragrance surpasses those of 100 medicines, and is particularly useful to treat heat-induced congestion in the body. So here we see some interesting change in comparison to the Tang period time, when smell is considered to be useful to treat all kinds of poisons, right? So here it's thought to be more effective to treat heat-induced blockage, right? To clear up the blockage in the body as induced by the heat. So in addition, the drug is also suitable to add into tea, but too much of it could mask the smell of tea. Again, he repeats, among myriad things, nothing's fragrance is superior to this one. So the smell here is not contributes to healing, but also adds to the flavor of food and drinks. So to conclude, I want to bring 2 conclusions, one more empirical, one more conceptual. Empirically speaking, by my preliminary study of Tang and Song medical texts, I find this rising importance of aromatics and their smells in healing during the Tang and Song period time. For example, in the theoretical writings, we see this attention to the to discuss smell as the property of beings near the tongue, and more specifically, the property of drugs during the Song period time. In material medical and formula writings, which have a more empirical orientation, we find the discussion of aromatics and the smells more in the realm of countering different kinds of poisons, like malignant qi and demonic infestation and gu poison. Broadly, I would argue that there was a process, the importation of this variety of overseas aromatics facilitated the production of new knowledge through the interaction between overseas and domestic. The local actors always try to use local references to try to understand and use these faraway substances and create knowledge that can be useful for them. And I have an example of, in the Dunhuang manuscript, the combination of this faraway material and the mundane substances, as well as the juxtaposition of molecular and Duranis, spells to deal with the situation pressing at the hand, such as gu poison. I also have the example of the illustration of the camphor in the Song text, where we see the hybridity of knowledge combining what is considered to be useful, the collection of resins, but also using local trees as key references. And finally, back to the relevant the medicine, I want to say that so the idea of the smell, right, the rise of rising importance of smell during the Tang and Song period time, it didn't fundamentally alter the existing category of such as qi, which refer to degree of hotness, or taste, weight, right? These are foundational category of drugs established long time ago. Smell didn't really fundamentally alter, but added a new dimension to it. Smell either work with or work through these existing categories to explain drug action, especially during the Song period time. So when we think about a smell-guided remedy, we should not too quickly jump onto this kind of premodern idea of aromatherapy, because smell always works with something else in the existing framework in Chinese medicine, right? So, but it's interesting that to think about smell and its synergism with taste of food, with the sound of incantation in either medical, but also religious and food culture context, a topic I'm excited to explore further in my future research. So with that, I would like to conclude my talk, and thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to discuss with you further in the Q&A.
Couple questions. Would it be improper for you to have brought some fragrances to incense to burn during your talk? Or
Yeah, that's a great idea. In both my teaching, I haven't done that before, but I have colleagues and friends who have done that, especially in the context of teaching. Of course, we can only get, the modern version of them, which is not exactly the same as, we do have archaeological finds of these resins, but of course, they are too precious to be burned in front of front. But I think that's a good point because, when we talk about materiality, right? So there's, the discussion of materiality in the text, right? So I study, produced in Tang and Song period time, but also the materiality in a sense, the material sense that we can touch and see and smell and taste, these materials. And that's important. In the future, I think that's definitely something I like to do. Yeah.
okay, and where would you go to get these? Would you go to a practitioner of the medicine, or would you make it yourself? Pick up the ingredients and make it yourself, or how would you get it?
Yeah, so I wouldn't start with preparing by myself. I would start with something, like preset, a product. The easiest place you can get it from, Oh, back then, I see. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood your question. So, original aromatics, they were imported into Tang and Song China through different channels. There's, in the elite circle, you have envoys presenting these aromatic substances, either as the raw form or the prepared form to the Tang and Song court. You also have a very important channel of trade, actually, which I didn't have time to talk about, by Arabic, Persian, and Sogdian traders who actually introduced a massive amount of these substances. There are, prepared, more processed product imported, such as camphor, actually. So camphor, actually, the local people in Southeast Asia, they process the product first and produce this kind of crystalline product and then get imported into the Song for usage. And sometimes the leftover of the chips of the trees could be used. They got imported into Song as well, where they were used to produce not the most superior, but kind of less superior product for usage. So there's a kind of a connoisseurship rising during the Song period time with different type of product, different processing procedures, different location, source of supplies with different values associated with them. Thank you.
So is this on? Yeah. Okay, great.
Yes, Neely.
Hi, really amazing talk. I just had some questions about, because I know this is your second book project, and I have some questions about like what sort of avenues you're going to be looking at. And one of the things I was wondering when you're talking about materiality is if the materiality of the human body is going to play any part in this. And I'm especially struck by this idea that camphor can be used to deal with blockages of heat. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to remember the reference, but I remember reading a reference about xiang are good for tong. They can tong blockages, right? And if you smell camphor or any of these things, right, immediately they open up your nostrils. And especially for things like epidemic diseases, at least later in the Ming, they talk about E coming in through the nostrils. Right? And so I'm kind of wondering if that's part of it. And the other thing is, as you know, I'm working on this book on injury medicine, and xiang is huge for injury medicine. And so, I'm just wondering, again, do you have any bandwidth in the project for looking at the, things that they're being used for that would increase? And then the last thing I was curious about, again, materiality is, mothballs. I don't know if anybody still uses mothballs, right? But they're made of camphor. They're made of
Yeah,
fragrance. And so
yeah.
I'm wondering whether there's an overlap between observation, right, of these things and then the kind of medicinal properties that were associated with them. So.
Yeah, thank you for these stimulating questions. So the idea of a tongue or opening the orifices, it's very interesting. I don't see it in the Tang text, and I see the kind of this a trace of it from the Song text on, illustrated by the last example I give. I think that's the kind of a starting point from the 12th century on. People think about this idea of clearing congestion, obstruction, blockages in the body. Right? So I think that's a very interesting change in the song. And later medical writers actually picked up that. They will say, and they discuss it often in the context of the drug property of these aromatics, particularly their heating or dry and hot nature, and it's particularly effective to treat heat-induced congestion in the body. Another thing I find interesting that I need to explore more is whether this is through the nose or through other channels. This is the basic idea of how these aromatics interacted with the body. We know most of the aromatic medicines in the song, they are used for ingestion. They make pills, actually. Of course, those pills could have smell, but they don't really say that, right? And there's a lot of ingredients there, right? So, and we can assume that for a farmer with lots of aromatic substances in it, the ultimate pill could have some kind of interesting smell. But they never really say, you smell it, and then it becomes, your body becomes becomes open up, right? So, and that might come up with later sources. That's something I find is very interesting. So this idea of smelling actually is something I don't really see in these texts, although it doesn't mean the smell is not important. And wu xiang is something I haven't encountered in all the texts I have read so far in the Tang and Song, and I'm happy to talk with you more. What are those 5 particular aromatics, and whether there's variation? Of course, it's huge in food, right? So that's a different, possibly related story, And finally, what is your final point?
Insects.
So insect repellent. Yeah, I don't really see that. Actually, well, if you consider creatures to be malignant creatures in the environment, that this kind of fragrant substance can be powerful to expel them. But that's more broad. It's not so specific. And the moss ball, it is connected to camphor, but it's much later. And this camphor, Long Nao Xiang, actually referred to a Southeast Asian product, very precious because of the distance, and rarity. But there is a different kind of camphor tree growing in South China and Taiwan, Japan, called zhangshu, right? So that reference can be traced back to much early time in Asian China. So, but zhangshu actually became much more prominent in late imperial way to the modern period because of they are the material to produce mothballs. For example, they do have the fragrant smell as well, not the same as the dragon brain aromatic. And of course, in the 20th century, there is a manufactured camphor with the rise of chemistry, so the story totally changed. Right? So, yeah. Thank you. Yes,
I just wanted to build on that reference to camphor. I remember as a child reading about polio epidemic in the West, where parents would hang bags of camphor around children's necks to try to ward off the polio, which of course it was not successful at doing.
Yeah.
But I'm just wondering whether there's any sort of connection, is there any sort of transfer of knowledge or transfer of hypothesis about the medicinal uses of camphor, or are these sort of growing up isolated out of their different cultures?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so wearing camphor or other aromatics, the first thing is that wearing medicines close to your body. This is not unique to aromatics. It could be a variety of drugs, like, and sometimes poisonous substances, like one famous example is realgar, that's an arsenic compound. And from 3rd, 4th century, particularly Taoist priests will wear that when they enter the deep mountains to try to ward off the attack of animals like tigers. So, and in that long tradition, you can see the incorporation of wearing, aromatic substances close to your body. And this kind of practice, it's not unique to China as well, actually. So the example you just mentioned is interesting because in the early modern period in Europe, they do have camphor included among variety of aromatics and put into a beak-like mask. And so they wear that, doctors wear that, and to protect them from the plague, actually. So that's, a very important practice there as well. So we can see across different cultures. And yeah, thank you.
You don't know if there's any sort of exchange of knowledge or whether these are all independent?
At this point, I don't know. I tend to say this is more independent at this point. I don't have clear evidence of this kind of practice. I need to dig more to the, for example, the Indian literature to see how prominent this kind of thing is. I think it's there, but yeah.
I have two questions. One is, what was the process involved in determining how these aromatics treated illnesses? And the second question is, did cannabis or marijuana ever play a role in aromatics in China?
Okay. I'll start the second question first, the cannabis and marijuana. Usually I don't put it into the category of aromatics. I discussed cannabis, to be more precise, briefly in my first book on poison because it is considered yodu, that's possessing poison, or it's potent, poisonous, from very early on. And it's interestingly put into the category of food as a superior drug to enhance the body and promote longevity if you ingest it habitually but in small dosage. So if overdose could induce, in their language, seeing demons, alteration of mind. So of course, in the sense, all herbs have aromatic smell, right? So marijuana, for those of you who have consumed them before, they do have smell as well. But this is not something picked up by medical writers in China, either in the early time or the time I study. So that's why I didn't really include. And it's not a drug imported from outside the world. It's indigenous, actually. There are not many scholars working on the history of cannabis. I may do something in the future. There are early scholarship on why marijuana not becoming a key drug. It's there, but the use of it, at least for the period I study, is not that prevalent, I would say. Anyway, so the first question is the process of, what is the process of using these aromatics in medicine? The process, what do you mean by process? So so the process means processing of the drugs, right? In this case,
How do they find out certain aromatics treat certain illnesses?
Oh, I see. So that because I using the Tang as example, right? So I highlighted the importance of using this aromatic substances to treat poison-related conditions, like demonic infestation, like malignant qi, or like epidemic conditions. And so sometimes there is an indication of the smell of these aromatic medicines play a role there, because demons or demonic qi often associate with bad smell. So especially in miracle tales, these kind of stories, when the demon arrive, they have really bad odor. and you need some good stuff protecting you from that. And so that's one logic of thinking about the counteracting of these kind of malignant forces in the environment. Yeah. I mean, there are other examples. I don't say this is the only use of aromatics. There are other uses, such as the treatment of eye problems. And there is not particularly prominent that demonic qi play a role. And that actually has a more connection to the Ayurvedic medicine, which I didn't really talk in detail. There is an Ayurvedic influence actually during the Tang period of time. Sometimes the medical writers readily recognize the source of their formula is from India. They say that. And sometimes it's more implicit when you compare certain aromatic remedies with remedies produced in China. There are some striking similarities. And sometimes this is mediated by the Buddhist monks, right? So, so that's yeah, another interesting point. Yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
Christian.
Thanks so much for this talk, for this introduction to your new research. And there's so much to think about. But one question I have, I guess, concerns geography in the sense that I was wondering whether the high price of these imported aromatics during the Tang promotes attempts to find substitutes or to grow these trees and plants in the Tang Empire itself. And where that was impossible, do you have a sense that there was some idea of a conflict between the presumed sort of universality of the human body and medical knowledge on the one hand, and the locality of these aromatics, for example, right? Some kind of conflict that diseases that are local could be cured with ingredients that have to come from elsewhere.
Thank you. For the first question, during the Tang period of time, I don't find that much evidence on this issue of the transplantation, partly because of some of these trees are really hard to transplant. For example, the tree of camphor, it takes years to grow and to produce the products. So it's interesting in the Song text, illustrated mathematica, you do have, the label of the illustration. Often, like in camphor, it says Guangzhou camphor. My interpretation, that's not from Guangzhou, actually. That's probably referring to the trade of aromatics. Other aromatics, such as saffron, we do have very limited evidence on the growing of flowers. Presumably, flowers are easier to transplant than trees, particularly in royal gardens. But there's no widespread of transplantation of saffron either, right? So inevitably, they come to the issue of substitution, drug substitution, because they're very expensive. And we do find evidence, for example, saffron sometimes adulterated with turmeric, which is a local product in southwestern region. And the Chinese name for them just one character difference. Right? Saffron is yujin xiang, and turmeric is yujin. And both at the textual level and practical level, you see some kind of mixture there. And that's not unique in China, actually. Frankincense and those two different aromatics have been mixed up, adulterated for a long time. As a flower and saffron is another example. So there's many examples of that. The second question is, it's interesting. Basically, the idea whether something it's outside is appropriate to treat a body in Chinese medicine. So for the text I have read, I didn't really see people raise the doubts on this, actually. And partly because they are trying to integrate this thing into their own conceptual framework that they find is legible. Right? So this is both in medical and religious practices. They try to explain it in a way they are more familiar with. And no doubt sometimes the rarity of these substances from faraway place did play a role. This is, like Schaeffer's argument. Because they're exotic, they are hard to find, they are valuable. But more often, I find this integration to the indigenous framework that make them just, legible and ready to be used. Yeah.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
You mentioned that dragon brain was used in this Dunhuo manuscript from Tang Dynasty to cure this dragon poison, gu poison.
Gu poison, yeah.
Yeah. So gu poison can also be cured by spells.
Spells.
Which I have found that the way of using cursing it with spells is something like the feng shui in Han Dynasty, because they also named if I know your name, it can be cured.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So, but in the officially edited medical text from the Song Dynasty, it is called this dragon brain is better than hundreds medicines which can cure heat-induced congestion.
Yeah.
So my question is in the Tang Dynasty this gu poison understood as caused by demonic qi, so that it can be cured in the same way as with spells, or there is a shift in the Song Dynasty that it was understood as a disease caused by this heat-induced congestion. This is one. When not,
you're talking about gu poison, right?
Yeah, gu poison.
Yeah.
In the Tang Dynasty, the fragrance actually is a more powerful medicine to cure gu poison. Before that, they used different, I think, herbs or different ways. Also, if you have found, for example, in the Huangdi Neijing, Su Wen, other kinds of herbs have been used to cure gu poison. And what is the mechanism underlies it, which makes that it can also be cured by the spells?
Thank you. It's interesting that the gu poison is something I talk more in my first book on poisons. In Chinese medicine and beyond, there is this idea of using poison to counter poisons, 以毒攻毒, right? So there's a variety of treatment for gu poison, and aromatic treatment is just one type. It's that by no means the only type. And there is a long tradition using powerful medicines, poisons in our eyes, to counteract gu poison, using this rationale, using poison to counter poisons. And Huangdi Neijing is not the text I look for, because they really don't talk about drug therapy. But the former books, material medical texts, they talk about this way of countering gu poison quite a lot. And it's interesting, during the Tang period time, I see this incorporation of these overseas aromatics into that healing repertoire. And my thinking is that gu poison belong to a particular category of illnesses in Chinese medicine that's often conceived illness as concrete and specific agents, rather than it's something, imbalance of the qi or lost the harmony of the qi inside the body. That's more of a functional conception of illness. This is more of an ontological conception of illness. And in order to do that, you need to use powerful approaches, like using powerful poisons, or later on using aromatic substances to dispel or to get rid of these agents. And the Song situation, it's interesting. The one I gave you example, the camphor in the detestation of material medica, there's nothing to do with gu poison there. Actually, it doesn't mention gu poison. So the heating congestion is something. It's more functional in a sense, or physiological rather than ontological in the way of conceiving illnesses. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that there's no use of aromatic substance to counter gu poison in the Song. It's just, I need to read more medical works to find that. Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question from the virtual audience.
Yes, please.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. I wonder if you could please elaborate a bit more about how this project on aromatics will deepen our understanding of how medieval Chinese people viewed the sensorium in general, like how they envisioned the sensory interactions with their world. You mentioned that it's often the case that smell worked together with other sense perceptions. Have you come across any texts that describe the interplay between the sense of smell and visualization processes, for example? Thank you.
Thank you for that excellent question. As I mentioned in my talk, I really want to have conversation with scholars on sensory studies. And this is a question in that regard. The one thing is that very few scholars have done the history of senses in pre-modern Europe. One scholar, Jane Genie, primarily focused on the ancient philosophical texts. And then she would argue that at that moment, vision, the seeing, and hearing are two most prominent senses. And first of all, there's no idea of five senses, well established in the Chinese philosophy and medicine either, actually. So that very idea of sense, actually, in China has a very different kind of epistemology. This is based on Genie's work in comparison to what we consider we have a sense, we observe outside the world, and then we get a sense based on our perception. That kind of correspondence, you don't really see that, at least in the ancient time, because sometimes the heart could be a sensory organ, right? So heart-mind, I'll say xin is a sensory organ. So it includes both the senses in our modern idea, but also affects, for example, what you think, what you feel. Anyway, so to put the long story short, in my study of these various senses, I find wen is a very interesting idea because wen in Chinese could mean both smelling and hearing. And sometimes it's not entirely clear whether it refers to one or the other. And Jeannie will say in the ancient time, wen tend to mean more hearing than smelling, but there might be a shift in the period I study, especially in the medical context, that it could mean both or smelling in certain contexts. So that itself is an interesting issue to tackle, the relationship between hearing and smelling. And I give you an example of the use of incantation together with the color of libation and the smell of medicine, particularly very salient in Buddhist context. These are practice-oriented texts. They don't really explain the working of different senses. They don't explain that at all. But I just find that phenomenon is quite interesting. Yeah, thank you.
So, as somebody who lost his sense of smell a couple of decades ago, so I've been, half my life has been with smell, half without. So I think about smell from time to time. But anyway, in Chinese culture later on, Liang Qichao, when he's talking about the effect of fiction on people, talks about one of the shun being fumigated, and a very powerful kind of idea. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, the way that the aromatics into the body kind of echo the way that they thought that malevolent qi into the body, zhongfeng. Mm-hmm. I had a stroke, and I realized that people still call that zhongfeng, to be hit by the wind. Mm-hmm. And so that seems to be a very strong way to conceive of the vulnerability of the body and the way to introduce something you think that will help with that problem. So I find it interesting that early texts that you're talking about, they tend to prefer ingestation of these things rather than fumigation.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm sorry about your loss of. I don't have a particular. I don't have a good smell either, actually. So my wife always teases me, you cannot smell anything. And that's not the reason why I study this project, to have the kind of personal reason. But fumigation does appear a couple of times, not so prominent. In one materia medica text dating to the 10th century called Overseas Materia Medica, the first extant materia medica devoted to overseas drugs. So there is a use of this aromatic guggle, xiang, that I mentioned early on in my talk. It's basically the use of fumigation at the cinnabar field, right, to treat women's condition. This is a condition called copulation with demons in their dreams. And so this is another form of poison. Basically, in their dreams, the demonic qi invaded their body and caused all kinds of problems. And fumigation become a very important a way to heal that. And it's interesting in that remedy, it's a combination of both far away, aromatic xiang, and also a local one, the realgar, as I mentioned before, arsenic compound, compounding them together, burning it, and fumigate at the abdomen site to treat this condition. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Okay, I think we have to end our series right now, but thank you so much, Xiang, for such an excellent talk. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your questions and attention. I really appreciate it. Yeah.